Now it's very important as we continue with this lecture that you go back and review part 1 of the Redeemer, the promised Redeemer. We ended part 1 by saying we did not write the script. This action movie that we're a part of, we didn't ask when to come in, and we really don't know and have no control over when we exit. We're just participant in this play, and this play is life. We didn't write it. Christ was the one who created us. He's the one who gave us the instructions. And so he's the one that lays the plan for salvation. Now I wanted to continue with that verse in Genesis 3 verse 15 because it means a lot, and it actually becomes the basis of the Bible. You know, every December you find the entire world celebrates what they would consider Jesus' birthday. Now, again, I'm trying to stay as strict to the Bible as possible. And in so doing, sometimes we have to identify falsehood. So while the world celebrates December 25th as the birth of Jesus, the truth is that it was not the birth of Jesus. And if you would like to see who was born on December 25th, my advice would simply be just to Google Tammuz, Tammuz, Tammuz and his birthday. Again, just because I'm not trying to give you any falsehood, but the point I'm making is that on December 25th, the entire world talk about peace and harmony and goodwill to man. And it's a joyous time, it's a festive time. I like that time. It's a time when the family gets together, or we go on vacation, and you see the lights and you see all these different things. And it seems like everybody's in a more sharing mode. The Salvation Army is out and everything, and what they're celebrating supposedly is Jesus's birth. And the reason for his birth actually is what should be celebrated. The reason for his birth is that he came to fulfill a promise of being our Redeemer. He came to fulfill the promise that was stated or was read in Genesis 3 verse 15, where it says, "And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel." The hypocrisy of everything is that while more people are celebrating Christmas, less people are Christians. While more people are celebrating the actions of what Christ stood for, the world has become more hostile. Hate has become more prevalent. When you look at the news, it seems like it is now an acceptable condition or an acceptable phase or an acceptable belief to say, well, you know what, I hate you just because of how you look. Despite the fact that every Christmas seems to be bigger and bigger and bigger. More money is made by things that are sold on Christmas. And so I can just imagine how Christ would feel, the hypocrisy of the whole thing. Here it is, people are saying they are celebrating me. But as soon as it's done, their heart is vile and wicked and hateful. But going back to the text, so the world celebrates Christ's coming. And the reason why Christ came was to die. As mentioned earlier, he died on the cross. He suffered, was pierced. But what I want to bring to you is the Bible. And how the Bible, in its prediction, from ever since Genesis 3 verse 15, pointed forward to the coming of Christ. The Bible is easily understood if you think of it as two books, Old and New Testament. And then you have a couple prophetic books. Now there are a lot of prophecies intermingled throughout the Bible, but for argument's sake, we're going to say Daniel and the Revelation are prophetic books. So the Old and the New Testament. It is written where both the Old and the New Testament points to the Savior. They both point to our redemption from the consequence of sin that our foreparents were involved in. Wages of sin is death. So when you look through the Old Testament, and I'm going to just give you a few texts, it says there are at least 65 direct messianic prediction. Now, messianic talks about the Messiah. When you go through the Old Testament, from Genesis 3 verse 15 onward, interspersed between the different books, it talks about Christ coming. Then if you add to it the sanctuary system, they call that the sacrifices, and all the different mini prophecies, then you actually add much more than 65. 65 were direct prophecies. It says these prophecies relate to such specific detail as the scepter. The scepter shall not depart from Judah. That came from Genesis 49 verse 10. It told us where he would be born. It says that he would be born in Bethlehem in Judah. When you read Micah 5 verse 2, you get that. It says that he would be despised and rejected of men, beaten, falsely accused, yet not open his mouth to defend himself. That's Isaiah 53, 3-7. That his hand and his feet would be pierced, and that they would divide his clothes among them. You get that from Psalms 22, 12-18. There are many other places in the Old Testament that gives you direct information about how Christ would come and what he would do. He came to his own and his own received him. In Isaiah 9 verse 6, it says, "For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given. The government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace." And you remember when he came, the wise men was passing through, and they told the king at the time that they were looking for the King of Israel. And because of that, he caused a slaughter to take place. All the children that were 2 years and older and younger, all the men the boy child who was 2 years and younger were killed. The government was after his shoulder. He had to leave, and he had to escape. Joseph was told to go into Egypt. And so you find that the Old Testament over and over is predicting that there would be a Savior. All the different texts and the Bible, as it continues to flow, what it's giving us and what it's telling us is that Jesus is coming. That's the Old Testament. Sin came, and it tells us that sin, the wages of sin is death. And then it started the prophecies. It started to roll out the fact that there would be a Savior, that there would be a Jesus, there would be someone to come and save us from the condition that we put ourselves. When you read in Matthew and Mark, and you start in the early Gospels, the New Testament now echoes that Jesus came. When he came, if you remember, the Bible talks about there were people who were expecting him. The old prophet and prophetess Anna. When they saw him, they were studying, and they said, "Oh yes, now we have seen the Savior." The New Testament now talks about him being here. The disciples thought that he had came to save them in the condition that they were in. They thought that he came to redeem them from the Roman strong arm. But again, he started to reveal to them that the salvation that they need is not something of this earth, but they need to be looking forward to the salvation. And so the New Testament now takes you and bring you in through to Revelation, where again you're looking for that day when the Savior will come. So the Old Testament points to Jesus coming, and the New Testament tells you Jesus is here, but it's not the end. What he is bringing you and what he's asking you to look forward to and to live accordingly, and to live so that you can make it into heaven. So the New Testament now gives you the instructions of how we should live again to make it to heaven. So as I started off by saying, the irony of the whole situation is that the world celebrates his birth, but yet still they don't celebrate him. They speak of him coming as a child, but they don't look forward for him coming as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. You see, when Adam and Eve sinned, they realized that within themselves, they were not worthy to be able to save themselves. When someone gives a law, it becomes easy for one to break the law, but it takes only someone who is on the level of the lawgiver to forgive you and allow you to be able to be redeemed. That's the best word to use.